The fire had taken the house in less than an hour, leaving behind blackened beams, scorched earth, and a silence that settled too deeply into the land. Eleanor Warren stood at the edge of what had once been her life, the smell of ash clinging to her clothes long after the flames were gone. She had survived, but survival felt thin, almost accidental. Since that night, time had moved forward without her permission, each day stacking itself onto the last, asking nothing and offering even less. This was a story about what remains after loss, about the quiet courage it takes to stay, and about the kind of love that does not demand, but waits. Subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales for new emotional Western stories where broken lives find their way forward, one moment at a time.
The morning sun spilled over the hills of Cedar Valley, casting warm light across the quiet streets of Willow Creek. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and dust. Lila Monroe swept the porch of her small general store, moving with careful precision, her hands calloused from years of labor. The store had belonged to her late father, a man whose laughter lingered in memory, a warmth she had thought lost forever. At 33, she had grown used to routine and solitude, keeping herself distant from the small world around her. Loss had marked her heart, leaving it guarded and cautious. A sudden sound drew her attention. Hoofbeats approached on the dirt road. A man appeared, riding a dusty horse, his wide-brimmed hat shading sharp green eyes. He dismounted and walked toward the store with deliberate steps, carrying a quiet assurance that made the air seem charged. Inside, he moved with respect, handling the merchandise carefully and noticing small details. Lila guided him through the supplies, offering advice on the most reliable items. He accepted it with quiet gratitude, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of acknowledgement that reached beyond mere courtesy. He paused at a display of flowers, lingering over the delicate petals, and chose a few carefully, as if imagining how they might grow. Lila felt a subtle warmth in her chest, a small shift in her carefully maintained solitude. When he left, dust rising behind his horse, Lila stood on the porch, feeling an unfamiliar ache of curiosity and hope. The town continued its daily rhythm, but the quiet air around her had changed. For the first time in years, her heart trembled with the possibility of something new, and the weight of her careful walls loosened just enough to let uncertainty, and perhaps life itself, slip in.
Over the following days, the rhythm of Willow Creek settled into a delicate pattern. Lila found herself noticing the man, whose name she had learned was Ethan Caldwell, more often than she expected. He returned to the store frequently, each visit purposeful, always carrying some new need for his ranch a few miles outside of town. She watched him work with quiet diligence, the kind of patient determination that made her feel both respect and an unfamiliar pull in her chest. Ethan spoke little of himself, yet every small action revealed a character shaped by experience and care. He remembered details she mentioned in passing, noting her preferences for certain tools or the best suppliers for staples. The precision of his attention unsettled her in ways she had not anticipated. She had lived her life within well-worn routines, yet he seemed to notice the edges and shadows of her days that no one else did. One afternoon, the sun blazed hot, and Lila watched Ethan load a cart with feed and equipment. He moved efficiently, but never without consideration for the younger workers who assisted him, guiding them patiently and offering encouragement. She realized that it was not just the work itself, but the manner in which he approached it, with respect and steadiness, that left her quietly in awe. In the evenings, when the store closed and the streets emptied, Leela found herself lingering near the door, hoping for another glimpse of him. The town continued its predictable rhythm, but something within her shifted, a cautious curiosity stirring where long-suppressed hope had once been buried. She tried to dismiss it, reminding herself of past losses and the safety of solitude, yet her thoughts betrayed her. Ethan's presence brought subtle changes to the store and to her own days. He offered small gestures, like carrying her parcels when the cart became too heavy, or suggesting improvements to the dusty back porch garden. Each action carried an unspoken kindness, a recognition that she mattered in ways she had not allowed herself to feel for years. By the week's end, the tension between the familiar and the new had grown tangible. Lila could feel the weight of her guarded heart pressing against the possibilities that Ethan's presence suggested. The ache of cautious longing mingled with the fear of vulnerability, a conflict she had buried deep for far too long. The horizon outside the store glowed golden at sunset, and she realized that change had quietly crept into her life, unannounced but undeniable. For the first time in years, she wondered if life could hold more than survival and routine. She imagined the distant hills beyond the valley, the ranch, and the possibility of shared mornings and quiet evenings. The thought unsettled her and stirred a reluctant hope, small but persistent, like the faintest glimmer of light before dawn. Days bled into one another, each marked by the steady rhythm of work and the subtle weight of unspoken thoughts. Leela noticed that Ethan's visits were no longer solely for business. He lingered longer, pausing near the porch or wandering through the store, as though he sought her presence as much as her guidance. She felt a strange tension in her chest, a mixture of curiosity and fear, the same uncertainty that had kept her walls fortified for years. Ethan's diligence and quiet patience became a mirror for her own longing. She watched him manage tasks with methodical care, never rushing, never dismissing the smaller details that others often overlooked. There was an unspoken elegance in the way he treated people, young and old alike, offering instructions without condescension and listening with genuine attention. It was a behavior so rare that it unsettled her, forcing her to confront the emptiness she had accepted as normal. One morning, a sudden storm rolled over the valley, dark clouds swallowing the sunlight and sending a chill through the town. Leela hurried through her daily chores, feeling the familiar unease of isolation. Ethan appeared at the store with the first drops of rain, drenched but unhurried. Without a word, he began helping with the deliveries, his steady movements anchoring the chaos. Leela watched him, the sight of his calm presence in the storm cutting through her habitual caution. She realized that she felt something she had not in years, a sense of safety alongside another human being. The storm passed, leaving the streets glistening and the air scented with rain and earth. Leela lingered at the window, observing Ethan as he secured the supplies and tended to the small repairs needed on the carts and tools. Each gesture was deliberate, each action thoughtful, and she found herself measuring the distance her heart had traveled without noticing. His quiet focus reminded her that life could be both demanding and gentle, structured yet unexpectedly tender. Evenings became more layered with emotion, small moments accumulating into a tapestry she could no longer ignore. She noticed the way Ethan's presence drew out laughter, fleeting glances, and a softness in her own movements she had long abandoned. The store, once simply a place of work and routine, transformed under his influence into a space of connection, subtle and profound. The town carried on around them, indifferent to the growing current between two cautious souls. Yet the rhythm of their shared days suggested the beginnings of something undeniable. By the end of the week, Lila felt a strange compulsion to linger at the door, to watch Ethan mount his horse or organize his wares, noticing the minute gestures of care and strength. Her chest tightened, a mix of anticipation and fear, as the walls she had so carefully built began to tremble.
The reality she had long feared, letting someone into her life again, was no longer theoretical. It existed in every smile he offered, every small task he completed with her in mind. That night, she lay awake, the memory of his steady gaze and quiet diligence mingling with the soft sounds of the town outside. The fear of vulnerability wrestled with an unfamiliar hope, a fragile thread she felt but could not yet name. It was the beginning of a reckoning with her own heart, a realization that the walls of solitude she had constructed might no longer be sufficient to contain the life she was slowly learning to imagine.
The days stretched longer as summer edged toward fall, each morning carrying a soft gold light that touched the hills and spilled across the main street. Lila noticed how the town seemed smaller now, contained within the rhythm of Ethan's visits and the quiet flow of her own work. He arrived with the rising sun, hat in hand, boots caked with the dirt of distant roads, yet his presence felt deliberate, steady, and grounding. She found herself unconsciously timing her tasks to meet him at the store, anticipating his quiet smile and the way he moved through the space with unspoken care. Repairs at the ranch demanded more of Ethan's time, and yet he always found moments to linger, to ask after Lila's well-being, to notice the small details of her routine, the way she organized the ledgers, the careful sweep of the porch, even the faint scent of the candles she burned at dusk. All of it seemed to register with him, though he never commented overtly. That attentiveness unsettled her, forcing her to confront feelings she had long buried. The walls of her heart, erected over years of solitude and loss, began to tremble under the weight of acknowledgement. She was feeling again, and she could not ignore it. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Ethan, sent by a distant acquaintance claiming urgent news of the ranch's former accounts. The delivery boy brought it to the store, and Lila watched as Ethan read the folded paper, tension flickering across his face. Though the matter was minor, the sight of him momentarily unsettled made her realize how deeply she had come to depend on his presence. The thought of his absence, however temporary, brought a pang she could not dismiss. She felt a new awareness of vulnerability, the kind that accompanies the opening of one's heart. Evenings became stretches of quiet reflection. Leela pacing the length of the store or standing on the porch as the wind carried the scent of dry grass and rain-washed soil. She measured the rhythm of Ethan's footsteps in her mind, the way he handled the crates, the patience with which he approached every task, and she recognized that her solitude was no longer sufficient to contain her thoughts. For the first time in years, she imagined a future not defined solely by her work and memories, but by the possibility of shared days, of laughter, of someone seeing her in totality. The town continued its steady life around them, indifferent to the private tension growing in the space of the general store. But within those walls, every action carried significance. Every glance, every pause, every careful gesture deepened the unspoken connection. Lila felt the stirring of hope, fragile yet insistent, and with it came a quiet fear, fear of expectation, of loss, of revealing too much. Yet the awareness of those emotions only made them sharper, more tangible, and more impossible to ignore. By week's end, she noticed the way her heart quickened at Ethan's arrival, how her hands unconsciously sought the comfort of routine with him nearby, how the mere sound of his boots on the porch signaled a sense of grounding she had not known she craved. The slow build of intimacy pressed against her defenses, and she realized that life, as carefully contained as she had tried to keep it, was beginning to demand something more. She was no longer merely surviving. She was beginning to participate, fully and painfully, in the possibility of something greater than herself.
The morning air carried a chill that hinted at autumn's arrival, and with it a tension that Lila could feel coiling in her chest. Ethan had been quieter than usual, his focus on the ranch work sharper, almost restless, and she sensed the unspoken weight pressing between them. She tried to ignore it, but every glance, every deliberate movement he made seemed to speak volumes, and the space between them, once comfortably filled with casual conversation and shared tasks, now held an intensity that made her pulse quicken. A sudden misstep at the barn startled them both. Ethan had leaned too far while adjusting a post, losing his balance for a moment. Lila rushed forward instinctively, her hands gripping his arm, her breath catching at the sharp fear that had shot through her. Relief and adrenaline intertwined, leaving her heart racing as she stepped back, realizing how deeply she had begun to care, how attached she had become to his presence, his safety. The awareness pressed heavily against the walls she had so carefully built, forcing cracks she could no longer hide from. The days blurred, the work piling up as the ranch demanded repairs before the first frosts. Yet Ethan still sought her counsel, still lingered at the store longer than strictly necessary, his attention unwavering. Every shared moment, however brief, became a test of courage. Lila found herself imagining scenarios that had once been unimaginable, afternoons spent together without tasks to fill the silence, evenings where conversation might drift into laughter and unguarded revelations. The weight of possibility made her restless, her thoughts spinning between hope and the fear of disappointment.
One afternoon, news arrived of a fire at a nearby property. Minor, but alarming. And Ethan immediately left to assist the neighbors. Lila watched from the porch, her stomach tightening with worry. The minutes stretched into hours, each one a drumbeat of anxiety. When he returned, safe and determinedly cheerful, she realized she had been holding her breath without realizing it, and the intensity of relief left her shaking. That fear, that sharp reminder of vulnerability, crystallized her emotions. She understood, with undeniable clarity, how much she had begun to depend on him, not just for practical matters, but for the fragile hope of connection, of being seen. Evenings were no longer just quiet reflection. They were laden with unspoken questions, with longing measured in small touches and lingering glances, with the ache of uncertainty. Lila felt the stirrings of desire and trust entwined, a tension that demanded acknowledgement. The town moved around them, indifferent, but within the store and across the sun-bleached fields. Every step, every decision, every shared task carried the gravity of emerging love. By the end of the week, Lila recognized that she could no longer pretend that her feelings were optional. The depth of her attachment, the intensity of fear and hope combined, had pushed her toward a choice she had not yet articulated: to step fully into vulnerability or retreat to safety. The emotional weight pressed on her shoulders, demanding courage she did not know she still possessed, yet could no longer deny. The possibility of tomorrow, uncertain and terrifying, felt alive with potential. And Lila sensed that whatever came next, life would not allow her to remain unchanged. The first light of dawn stretched across the valley,
turning the fields into ribbons of gold and copper. Lila stood at the edge of the porch, her hands gripping the railing as if it could anchor her to the present. The tension that had coiled inside her for weeks was still there, but now it carried a different weight. A mixture of fear, anticipation, and undeniable longing. She knew that today could no longer be postponed. Whatever path lay ahead, it would demand courage, honesty, and the willingness to take the risk she had long avoided. Oh, Ethan appeared at the barn, silhouetted against the rising sun. His movement steady, deliberate. The sight of him, hands dirty from work, hair catching the morning light, eyes alert and searching, made her pulse quicken. Every shared glance over the past weeks, every quiet conversation, every moment of vulnerability had led to this. She could feel the unspoken question lingering in the air, the invisible thread connecting them tighter than ever. As the day unfolded, they moved through the chores with the practiced rhythm of shared labor. But beneath the surface, a current of tension ran deep. Lila's mind traced every possibility, every fear she had carried alone for so long. And yet, with each passing moment, she realized that the fear no longer dominated her. It had been tempered by hope, by trust, by the undeniable truth that she had been chosen, seen, and valued for everything she was. By late afternoon, the sun hung low, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rose. They paused by the edge of the field, the air charged with anticipation. Lila felt her chest tighten, her hands clammy, her mind a whirlwind of emotions, fear, relief, desire, and the quiet exhilaration of finally surrendering to something she had long thought impossible. Ethan's presence was a promise, steady and unwavering, and she allowed herself to lean into it, to feel the warmth of connection that had grown from small gestures into something profound. The moment stretched, fragile yet monumental. Lila's heart, once heavy with grief and guarded against hope, opened fully. She let the walls she had built for years crumble, brick by brick, until only the core of trust and affection remained. And when she met Ethan's eyes, she understood, in a way words could never capture, that the choice was mutual, that the risk was shared, and that the future, however uncertain, could be embraced together. Evening descended, soft and forgiving, and the ranch, the town, and the wide, open sky seemed to hold their breath alongside them. Lila rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of a heart that matched her own. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, she knew she had found what she thought lost forever: love, safety, and the courage to begin again. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales and experience new emotional journeys every day.